This is my real story, and my name is Selena Marrow. I am 22 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is not just a nightmare, it is the truth that ruined my life and my family forever. I know many people come online to listen to stories, some real, some fake, but I swear on everything I love that what happened to me in Gravemont, Maine was as real as the blood in my veins a few years ago. My family moved into an old coastal house that we inherited from relatives we barely knew, and from the very first day, I felt an unexplainable heaviness in its walls, as if something had been waiting, watching for us to arrive. I brushed it off as stress, but soon things started happening, and what began as shadows in the corners turned into screams. In the walls, and those screams belonged to someone who had been wronged, someone whose revenge would destroy me piece by piece until there was nothing left of my life. Before I take you into the horrors that I lived, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others, because only by spreading this can her truth finally be heard. And remember, this story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. When my parents told me we were leaving our apartment in Boston to move into a house we had inherited in Gravemont, Maine, I thought it would be an adventure. My father had grown up hearing whispers about distant relatives who lived in that strange coastal town, but never really spoke of them, and when a letter came from a law office saying that a property had been left to him, he saw it as an opportunity for me, though I had just turned 22 and was finishing my college courses remotely, so the timing felt inconvenient. I didn't want to abandon the life I had built in the city for some broken-down house in a town no one had heard of. Still, my father insisted, saying it was a fresh start for us, and my mother was strangely quiet about the whole thing, as if she already knew something she wasn't saying. The drive up was long, winding through thick woods and empty coastal roads, the kind of scenery that feels like it belongs in a painting rather than real life. And when we finally pulled into Gravemont, I understood immediately why people avoided it. The town seemed frozen in time, cracked sidewalks, shuttered shops, fishermen with faces so weathered they looked like ghosts themselves, and an air of suspicion that clung to us the moment we stepped out of the car. But it was the house that struck me the most. It stood on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, tall and skeletal with peeling gray paint, its windows reflecting the stormy skies like dead eyes. My stomach sank the moment I saw it, a sense of dread crawling at my throat, but my father was practically glowing with excitement, saying it was ours now, that we would make it beautiful again. I wanted to believe him, but the moment I set foot inside the floorboards, groaning like something alive, I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me, and that night, before I even unpacked, I heard the first whisper. It came from the walls, soft but sharp, like a woman's voice saying my name, Selena, and though I tried to convince myself I imagined it, I knew deep down that something in this house had been waiting for me long before I ever arrived. The first few nights in the house at Gravemont were unbearable, not because of the creaking floors or the salty sea wind that whistled through cracks in the walls, but because of the voice, always the voice that called my name when the lights went out, a whisper that slid under my skin and clung to my bones. And though I told myself it was my imagination, the terror in my chest said otherwise, and it wasn't long before my parents began to notice my restlessness. My mother would catch me staring into the dark corners of my room, asking gently if I was okay, but I could see in her eyes that she too was hearing things she didn't want to admit, because every time the wind carried a low moan through the hallways, her body stiffened and she would quickly change the subject. My father, on the other hand, was too obsessed with fixing the house to notice the way it was swallowing us whole. He spent his days hammering, painting, repairing, pretending that decay could be covered with fresh wood and plaster, but at night, even he could not ignore the cold that seeped from the walls, a cold that no fire could chase away. The second week we lived there, I began waking at exactly 3:12 a.m., my body jerking awake, as if someone had shaken me, and every night at that same time, I would hear the same sound, the dragging of feet across the upstairs hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate, followed by a faint sobbing that made my blood run cold. One night I gathered the courage to open my bedroom door, the old brass knob icy against my palm, and when I stepped into the hall, the sobbing stopped, abruptly replaced by silence so thick it felt like the air itself had frozen. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway near the window, a figure stood, not entirely solid, but not invisible either. A woman in a torn, sea-soaked dress, her hair clinging to her face, her head bowed as though in grief. My first instinct was to scream, but the sound caught my throat, and then she lifted her head. And I will never forget the eyes that met mine, hollow, dark, burning with a rage so deep it seemed endless. I stumbled backward into my room, slamming the door and pressing my back against it, my heart beating so violently I thought it would tear through my chest, and for hours I sat there too afraid to breathe until the gray light of dawn bled through my curtains and the house seemed to release me from its grip. I didn't tell my parents about what I saw because part of me was terrified that saying it out loud would make it more real, but another part of me sensed that the woman wanted me specifically, that she had called my name not just to frighten me, but because there was something binding us, something I didn't yet understand. Days turned into weeks, and the more time we spent in that house, the more the town itself seemed to turn against us. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Whispers followed me when I went into the small grocery store, and one afternoon an old fisherman approached me, his hands shaking, and muttered, "That house is not yours, girl, it belongs to her," before shuffling away as if he had said too much. That night I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying his words, and when the clock struck 3:12 a.m., I felt the familiar dread settle over me, but this time, instead of waiting, I lit the lantern I'd kept beside my bed, opened my door, and stepped into the hallway. The woman was there again, closer this time, her face clearer, and when I whispered, "Who are you?" she didn't vanish like before. Instead, her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and the sound that came out was not human, but a wail that seemed to shake the walls themselves. My parents woke instantly, rushing into the hallway, and though they didn't see her, they felt it, the house itself groaning as if alive, the windows rattling, the air sharp with the scent of salt and decay. My father shouted that it was just the storm outside, but there was no storm that night, only the truth none of us wanted to face. The house was haunted, and she was not just any spirit, she was someone with unfinished business, someone who had waited decades, maybe centuries, to take her revenge, and for reasons I didn't yet know. I was at the center of it. After that night, my parents refused to acknowledge what had happened, clinging stubbornly to explanations that made no sense, muttering about faulty windows or settling wood, but I knew better, and deep down I think they did too, because the fear in their eyes grew each evening as the sun dipped below the jagged cliffs outside, leaving our house crouched in shadow like some ancient predator waiting to pounce. I started digging into the history of Gravemont, spending long afternoons in the dusty public library, where old records and newspapers were stacked like forgotten tombstones, and it didn't take long before I found her. Annora Blackwell, a woman who had lived in our house more than a century ago, a widow accused of witchcraft after her husband and children were found drowned near the very cliffs that overlooked our property. The records painted her as a pariah, a cursed woman whose grief turned to madness, but I didn't buy the neat narrative the town had written to bury her. The details were too convenient, the accusations too swift, and as I read deeper, I discovered that it wasn't her husband and children who were drowned, it was her husband's mistress and their illegitimate child, and the townspeople loyal to him and eager to rid themselves of Annora's dark influence had blamed her, dragging her from the house one stormy night and casting her into the sea. My hands trembled as I read the faded ink, my stomach twisting with nausea as I imagined her gasping for air, clawing at the waves, while the townsfolk turned their backs, condemning her without trial, without mercy. It was no wonder her spirit lingered, bound to the place where her life had been stolen. Her grief and fury hardened into vengeance. The more I read, the more the pieces fell into place. And then came the detail that nearly stopped my heart. Annora's maiden name was Marrow. My name, my blood. I sat frozen in that dim library, the air heavy with dust and silence, as realization crashed over me like cold water. The woman haunting our house was not some random spirit, not some forgotten stranger, but my ancestor, and her rage was not just at the town that betrayed her, but at the generations of Marrows who had abandoned her to legend and shame, letting her name rot while they moved on. When I returned home that evening, clutching the brutal documents like they were proof of my own existence, I confronted my parents, my voice shaking as I demanded if they knew. At first they denied it, but then my mother broke, tears spilling down her face as she admitted that yes, the house had always been ours, passed down quietly through the family, but no one ever stayed long because things happened, accidents, madness, whispers, and the dark, and each generation chose to bury the truth rather than face it. My father shouted at her to stop, furious that she had revealed what he had tried so hard to keep hidden, but the damage was done, and in that moment I realized we were not just victims stumbling into someone else's nightmare, we were part of it, woven into its fabric, bound to Annora whether we wanted it or not. That night I couldn't sleep, the weight of her story pressing on my chest, and at 3:12 a.m., as expected, I woke to the sound of dragging footsteps, but this time, instead of fear, I felt a grim resolve settle in me, and when I opened my door, I stood my ground as Annora appeared, her eyes burning like black coals in the dim hallway light. "You're me," I whispered, my voice trembling but clear. And though she didn't speak with words, I felt her answer in my bones. A wave of grief and fury crashing into me so violently that I staggered back against the wall. Images flooded my mind, her children. Torn from her arms, her screams swallowed by the sea, her body sinking, her spirit rising. Tethered to the house like a chain she can never break, I gasped, clutching at my chest as the visions ripped through me, and then I saw something else. Fire, blood, a town engulfed in chaos. Her revenge not just aimed at those who wronged her, but at all who carried their blood. Including me, I begged her to stop, to let me help her find peace, but her face twisted, half in sorrow, half in rage, and she vanished, leaving behind a stench of salt water and decay that clung to the walls long after she was gone from that night. On, the haunting escalated doors slammed violently, dishes shattered in the middle of the night, and strange symbols appeared scratched into the wooden beams. Symbols I recognized from the old trial documents as marks of protection and curse. My parents grew more frantic, my father drinking heavily to numb his fear. My mother praying desperately in a house that seemed to mock her faith with every flickering light bulb and every shadow that moved where no one stood in me. I began to change. It wasn't just the exhaustion from sleepless nights or the constant fear gnawing at my sanity. It was something deeper, something inside me waking up, responding to Annora's call. I began to hear her voice in the daytime, soft and persuasive, whispering that I was her last chance, that I could finish what she started. That blood must. Answer for blood. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror of my room and didn't recognize myself, the eyes darker, the smile sharper, as though her spirit was bleeding into me, molding me into her instrument, and yet a small part of me resisted, desperate to believe I could choose another path. That I didn't have to become her, but the town didn't make it easy. Neighbors avoided us completely now, muttering when they thought I couldn't hear, calling me the witch's heir, spitting the word like poison. One evening when I walked into the store to buy bread, the owner's wife crossed herself and hissed. It should have drowned with her. Before slamming the door in my face, rage burned in me then, hot and dangerous, and for the first time I understood how Annora must have felt betrayed, abandoned, despised for something she didn't deserve that night. As the wind howled against the cliffs and the sea roared below, I lay awake, trembling not from fear but from the choice looming before me. Would I fight Annora's curse and try to free us, or would I embrace it, let her vengeance flow through me, and make Gravemont pay for what it had done? The clock ticked closer to 3:12, and I knew when it struck. She would be waiting for my answer. The night of reckoning came when the storm rolled in from the Atlantic, swallowing Gravemont in black skies and thunder that rattled the bones of the cliffs. And as the clock crept toward 3:12, I sat on the floor of my room, my hands shaking, candles burning low, the air so heavy with salt and electricity that it felt like the sea itself had seeped into the walls. My parents had locked themselves in their room, terrified to face what we all knew was coming, but I couldn't hide anymore. Not when Annora's voice pulsed inside my skull like a second heartbeat, demanding a choice, urging me to become the weapon she had sharpened for a century. When the moment came, the air cracked with cold, and Annora appeared before me in full form for the first time, no longer just a shadow, but a figure of dripping black hair, a face twisted with both beauty and rot, eyes like endless pits of night. Her presence swallowed the room, drowning out the sound of the storm. And when she reached out a hand, skeletal fingers glistening as if still wet from the sea, I knew she was offering me more than just power. She was offering me belonging, a bond sealed by blood and pain. The rage in me screamed to take her hand, to unleash everything Gravemont had sown, to burn the town to ash for their cruelty. But then I thought of what I had become in these weeks. Sleepless, hollow, consumed, and I realized vengeance was not freedom. It was a chain, and if I took her hand, I would be bound forever. Just another ghost in her endless cycle of fury. You deserve justice, I whispered, tears streaking down. My face as lightning lit the walls, but not like this, not through me. And for the first time, Annora's expression flickered. Torn between rage and despair, she shrieked, a sound like 1,000 waves colliding with jagged rocks, and the candles snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness as her shadow swelled, wrapping around me like a tide determined to drag me under. I fought, not with strength, but with memory, with the image of her children ripped from her arms, with the injustice she had endured, with the truth that vengeance had never given her peace, only imprisoned her deeper. I screamed her name, calling her not as an enemy but as kin, begging her to see that I carried her blood, that I could keep her story alive without becoming her weapon. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to pause. Silence pressing in, and then I saw the glimmer of humanity buried beneath her rage. A mother's grief, a woman's loneliness, a soul who only wanted not to be forgotten. I reached forward, not to take her hand but to hold it. And though her flesh was cold as stone, the contact seared through me. A flood of sorrow and fury and love crashing into my veins until I thought I would shatter. Her scream softened into a wail, then a whisper, then nothing, and as the first light of dawn broke through the storm, Annora faded, dissolving into mist. That curled toward the sea, leaving behind only the faintest trace of salt on my lips and the echo of her voice. Remember me. The house fell silent, no footsteps. No rattling windows, no oppressive weight in the air, just the creak of old wood and the steady hum of the ocean beyond. My parents emerged hours later, stunned that the storm had passed, and though they never asked what happened, I saw the relief in their eyes, the recognition that something had ended. But peace is a fragile thing, and though Annora's presence was gone, I still carried her. Inside me, her memories, her pain, her warning Gravemont didn't change overnight. The neighbors still whispered, the storekeeper's wife still crossed herself when I walked by. But I didn't care anymore because I knew the truth. Annora wasn't a monster. She was a victim, twisted by betrayal into something unrecognizable. And I wouldn't let her be buried in lies again. I wrote her story. Every detail I could remember, every vision she had shown me, and I left it in the library archives where I had first found her name, ensuring that her voice would never be silenced. Again, some nights, when the sea is wild and the cliffs groan under the weight of crashing waves, I stand by the window and swear I hear her faintly. Not screaming, not furious, but humming a lullaby lost to time, carried on the wind. I know she's still out there. But no longer bound in rage, she's watching, waiting, maybe even healing us for me. I've learned that horror isn't just what haunts us in the dark, it's the choices we make when faced with that darkness. Whether we surrender to it or carve out a fragile light. And though the story of Annora Blackwell is one soaked in blood and tragedy, it is also a story of survival, of remembrance, of the thin line between vengeance and justice. My name is Selena Marrow. I am 19 years old, and this is my truth. Thanks for listening. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true stories written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries.